The phone rang at the worst possible moment. I was trying to unscrew a rusty faucet under the sink. The old pipes in this house had always been a hassle, especially after Clifford left. My husband had been a real handyman, but I had only learned basic plumbing when I was left on my own. I dried my hands on a kitchen towel and hurried to the phone, leaving the wrench on the bathroom floor. Hello? I always answered briefly, without ceremony. Mom? It's Garrett. My son's voice sounded tense, and I immediately sensed that something was wrong. In 20 years of motherhood, and then another 22 years as a grandmother, I had learned to recognize these notes in his voice. What's wrong? I asked, sinking into the old armchair by the window. He cleared his throat, another worrying sign. Garrett only cleared his throat when he was nervous or about to say something unpleasant. Veronique, Pearl's parents, and I discussed Eldon's wedding arrangements. He fell silent again, and I braced myself for something unpleasant. My son had never been good at speaking his mind, especially when it came to potentially conflictual situations. He had inherited this trait from his father. Cliff also preferred to avoid confrontation. I, on the other hand, had always been a proponent of calling a spade a spade. And, I prodded him, don't drag it out. I have a leaky faucet. We've decided that you're not invited to your grandson's wedding. The words hung between us like a heavy curtain. I felt something cold curl in my chest, but I kept my composure. I see, was all I said, clutching the phone tighter. Mom, you have to understand, it's not my decision. Veronica and Pearl's parents feel that after what happened at Christmas. I understand. In fact, I understood much more than Garrett wanted to say. It wasn't just a reaction to what happened. It was the culmination of many years of tension between Veronique and me, which had begun even before my son's wedding. I remembered our first serious conflict as if it were yesterday. Garrett had brought Veronique to Belmont for the weekend to introduce her to me and Clifford. She was a beautiful, well-groomed girl with a law degree and career ambitions. I immediately noticed how she looked appraisingly at our modest home, the old furniture, and even at me, an aging nurse with wrinkles from constant night shifts and hands that had never known a manicure salon. During dinner, she casually remarked that Garrett could find a better job in the big city instead of burying his potential at a provincial construction company. I replied that not everyone measures success by zeros in their paycheck and prestigious business cards. Cliff squeezed my hand under the table, our secret signal to slow down, Audrey. But I didn't slow down. And that was only the first of many such moments. Mom? Are you there? Garrett's voice brought me back to the present. Yes, I'm here, I replied. Just thinking. I tried to talk them out of it, but Veronica thinks you're deliberately trying to ruin the holiday. She says you never approved of their relationship with Pearl. There was some truth to that. Pearl, like her future mother-in-law, seemed overly concerned with the trappings of success. Eldon, on the other hand, had always been a simple guy, like his grandfather. Honest, straightforward, handy, and kind-hearted. He had chosen a career in emergency services against his parents' wishes, who wanted to see him in a suit at some corporation. I saw a glimmer of Cliff's blood in that decision, and it warmed my heart. Mom, I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, Garrett, I interrupted him. I'm just taking note. That was a lie, of course. Inside, I was a storm of emotions, resentment, anger, disappointment. But over my many years as a nurse in the emergency room, I had learned to keep my emotions in check. That ability only grew stronger after Clifford's death 3 years ago. I didn't cry at his funeral. I didn't sob over his belongings as I packed them into boxes. I just became more abrupt, more straightforward, more lonely, I guess. Without Cliff to smooth out my rough edges, I became a rough stone that constantly bumped into other people with my roughness. I'm sorry, Mom, I really am. I could almost see him standing there in his neat house with the white fence, twirling his wedding ring on his finger. Another habit that betrayed his nervousness. Veronica was probably nearby, maybe even listening to our conversation. Don't apologize, Garrett. It's your son's family's decision, and I respect it. I felt the bitterness of my own words. Eldon had always been special to me. My first grandson, so much like Clifford, not only in appearance but also in character. The boy who would sit with me for hours in the garage, helping me fix the old lawnmower or sorting through boxes of his grandfather's tools. Who listened to my stories about working at the hospital when others rolled their eyes at my medical horror stories. Now he was getting married, and I wouldn't be there on his big day. Are you really not angry? Garrett's voice sounded incredulous. I didn't say I wasn't angry, I replied honestly. I said I respected your decision. There was a pause. I could hear the TV playing in the background, probably another cooking show, which Veronica loved so much. Okay, he finally said. I'm glad you understand. But I didn't understand. I didn't understand how my own son could allow me to be excluded from such an important family event. I didn't understand why my grandson, with whom I had always had a special bond, didn't stand up for me. I didn't understand how it had come to this. The wedding is in 3 weeks, Garrett added, at Lakeview Gardens. I knew the place, a fancy restaurant overlooking the lake on the outskirts of Belmont. It wasn't surprising that they had chosen it. Veronique had always been drawn to ostentatious luxury. Thanks for letting me know, I said dryly. Now I have to get back to my sink. Sure, Mom, I'll call you next week. We both knew he wouldn't call. After conversations like this, Garrett usually avoided me for weeks, sometimes months. Goodbye, son. I hung up and sat for a few minutes, staring out the window at my small garden. The flower beds needed weeding, the hedge needed trimming. Cliff had always kept up the garden, and now I often forgot about these chores. The pain of the news was sharp but strangely detached. It was as if it had happened to someone else and I was watching from the sidelines. Perhaps it was a defensive reaction developed over years of working with seriously ill patients. Or perhaps it was the result of the emptiness I felt after my husband's death. I got up and slowly returned to the bathroom where the faucet was still dripping. Mechanically, I picked up the wrench, remembering how Cliff had taught me to use tools. Don't push, Audrey, turn it slowly, I thought I heard him say. Cliff always said that there was no problem that couldn't be solved with the right tool and a little ingenuity. Even if it seems hopelessly broken, there's always a way to fix it, he liked to say. And then it dawned on me. I wasn't going to sit around crying because I hadn't been invited to my grandson's wedding. I wasn't going to beg my son or Veronica to change their minds. I wasn't going to call Eldon and make a scene. I was going to find my tool and fix the situation my way. A plan began to form in my head, something that would show them all that I wasn't just some hurt old woman who could be pushed aside. Something that would remind Eldon of our special bond. Something that would surprise them all and maybe make them reconsider their opinion of me. No, I wasn't going to crash the wedding or do something petty and undignified. I had something much more unexpected in mind. With my new goal in mind, I quickly finished with the sink, washed my hands, and headed for my old secretary. Taking out a notebook and pen, I began to make a list of what I would need for my plan. I might not be at Eldon's wedding, but I certainly wouldn't be forgotten and unnoticed. Garrett, Veronica, and especially my dear grandson, they would all find out that old Audrey Marsh wasn't so easy to give up on. We'll see who's in for a shock in a week, I thought, resolutely writing down the first item on my list. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I remembered was yesterday's phone call. The hurt I had buried deep inside resurfaced, but I resolutely pushed it aside. I had been through a lot of turmoil in my life and had learned not to waste energy on empty emotions. I had to take action. I sat on the bed, staring at the empty half where Cliff used to sleep. Sometimes I still woke up in the middle of the night, reaching out to touch him, and each time I was hit with the realization that he was gone. Today, I especially missed his wise advice. What would you do, you old grump? I asked my invisible companion, as I had done so often over the past 3 years. Getting out of bed, I went to the kitchen to make my usual breakfast. Oatmeal with apple and a cup of strong tea. I sat down at the table and opened the notebook where I had hastily jotted down my thoughts yesterday. There was only one word. Surprise. No specific idea, no plan. Just a determination to do something that would make them all change their opinion of me. Stirring the oatmeal, I went over everything I knew about my grandson in my mind. Eldon had always been a special child. Quiet, thoughtful, but with an inner fire that burned brightly when it came to his passions. As a child, he collected model fire trucks, then became fascinated with engines, And at 16, he began asking his parents to let him buy a motorcycle. Garrett and Veronica were categorically against it. It's dangerous. You'll crash. That's not what we raised you for. The usual parental fears. I understood their concerns, but I could see how much it upset the boy. That year, on his 16th birthday, I gave him an old book on the history of motorcycles that I found in a secondhand bookstore. He was thrilled. We sat for hours leafing through the pages with photos of classic models. And then he told me about his dream for the first time. "Grandma, see this one?" He pointed to a photo of an elegant motorcycle with chrome details. "It's a 1968 Triumph Bonneville, a real legend. If I could choose any motorcycle in the world, this is the one I would choose." I remembered how he stroked the glossy page with his fingers, how his eyes lit up. At that moment, he looked so much like Cliff that I caught my breath. "You'll have one like that someday," I promised him then. Eldon smiled doubtfully. "Hardly, Grandma. Motorcycles like that are museum pieces, and they cost a fortune." But the dream remained. Even when he went to college and then to the rescue academy, on the rare occasions we saw each other, we still talked about classic motorcycles. And every time the Triumph Bonneville remained his favorite. I pushed my empty plate aside and took a sip of tea. This was it. That was what I could do. Give Eldon his dream, the motorcycle he had been dreaming about since he was a teenager. It would be the perfect wedding gift, showing the depth of my love for my grandson, and perhaps making everyone reconsider their decision not to invite me to the wedding. But where would I find a rare 1968 Triumph Bonneville? And more importantly, how could I afford such a purchase on my modest nurse's pension? I reached for the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart, even though I hadn't called it in months. "Hello?" came a hoarse voice on the other end. "Lennox? It's Audrey." Lennox Pryor was a longtime friend of Clifford's, and after he died, he became my friend too. A former military mechanic, he ran a small workshop on the outskirts of Belmont, where he repaired everything from lawnmowers to vintage cars. If anyone could help me find an old motorcycle, it was him. "Audrey Marsh, it's been ages. How are you, you old bat?" I couldn't help smiling. Lennox was the only person besides Clifford whom I allowed to call me Old Bat. "Better than you old geezer." "I hear your gout is acting up again." "Pff, just rumors. I'm as healthy as a horse." He coughed, refuting his own words. "Something happened?" "You're not the type to call just to chat." "I need your help, Lennox, and your expertise." "I'm all ears." I told him about my idea to find and give Eldon a Bonneville Triumph for his wedding. I didn't mention that I hadn't been invited. I didn't want to look pathetic in front of him. "A 68 Bonneville Triumph?" Lennox whistled. "Ambitious, Audrey. There are very few of those left, especially in decent condition." "And in indecent condition?" I asked. There was a pause. "Well, actually," he drawled, "Murdoch has an old Triumph in his junkyard. I'm not sure of the model or year, but it's definitely something from the 60s. My heart began to beat faster. Murdoch's junkyard, the one behind the railroad tracks. That's the one. Murdoch collects old motorcycles and cars. Most of them are just scrap metal, but sometimes you find real treasures. We could go take a look." "Today?" I asked, unable to hide my excitement. Lennox laughed. "You haven't changed, Audrey. Still as persistent as ever. Okay, I'll pick you up in an hour." Exactly 1 hour later, Lennox was always punctual, a military habit. His beat-up pickup truck pulled up outside my house. I was already waiting on the porch, dressed in old jeans and Cliff's flannel shirt, which I often wore for gardening. "Get in," he waved. "It's a long drive." Murdoch's junkyard was 15 miles from Belmont, on the outskirts of a neighboring town. Lennon and I chatted all the way there about this and that. His bad back, my overgrown garden, the new sheriff who was finally cracking down on the local teenagers who had taken to spray painting municipal buildings. Finally, the pickup turned off the main road onto a dirt track, and ahead we saw a tall gate with a sign that read, "Murdoch's Auto Wrecking, Private Property." "Wait here," Lennox said, getting out of the car. "I'll talk to Murdoch first. He's a real son of a bitch when it comes to business." I nodded and stayed in the cab, watching Lennox disappear behind the gate. Through the truck window, I surveyed the junkyard. Rows of rusty cars, mountains of spare parts, old tires. The place looked abandoned and a little sinister. 15 minutes later, Lennox returned accompanied by a tall, thin man with a tousled gray beard. This must have been Murdoch. "This is Audrey," Lennox introduced me. "Audrey, this is Murdoch." Murdoch gave me a once-over and nodded. "A lady interested in old motorcycles? That's unusual." "A lady interested specifically in a 1968 Triumph Bonneville," I replied, getting out of the car and holding out my hand. Murdoch shook it, and I felt the strength in his sinewy fingers. "Lennox says you might have one," I added. "Maybe," Murdoch replied evasively. "Let's go and see." We followed him deeper into the junkyard, winding our way between rows of mangled metal. Finally, he stopped near a small shed. "This is where I keep my special items," he said, unlocking a padlock. "Not everything in my junkyard is junk, you know." Inside the shed were several motorcycles covered with tarpaulins. Murdoch walked over to one of them and pulled off the cover. My breath caught in my throat. Even in its current state, with peeling paint, rust on the chrome parts, and a torn seat, the motorcycle was magnificent. Elegant lines, a classic silhouette, and a distinctive fuel tank with the Triumph emblem. "My God," I whispered. Lennox whistled and crouched down to examine the engine. "A 68 Triumph Bonneville T120, he confirmed. "It's in terrible condition, but it's definitely the real thing." "How much?" I asked Murdoch bluntly. He scratched his beard. "It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale," I objected. "Name your price." "You don't understand," Murdoch shook his head. "It's a collector's item." I was going to restore it. "When?" I asked skeptically, looking at the layer of dust on the motorcycle. "Judging by the looks of it, it's been sitting here for years." Murdoch frowned but didn't argue. $1,000, he finally said. "And that's only because you're a friend of Lennox's." My stomach tightened. $1,000 was a lot of money for me. But looking at the motorcycle, I realized it was a good price for such a rare item. $800, I offered. $950, Murdoch countered. Not a penny less. We settled on $925. That meant I would have to withdraw almost all of my savings, which I had set aside for a rainy day. But looking at the motorcycle, I felt it was worth it. "When can you pick it up?" Murdoch asked, shaking my hand to seal the deal. I glanced at Lennox. "Today," he replied for me. "I'll bring the trailer after lunch." On the way back to Belmont, I felt a strange excitement that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The plan was starting to take shape. I had a motorcycle, or what was left of it, and 2.5 weeks until Eldon's wedding. "Lennox," I said to my friend as we pulled up to my house, "will you help me fix it up?" He glanced at me quickly. "Are you serious? Audrey, that motorcycle is in terrible shape. It'll take weeks of work and a lot of money for parts." "I have 2.5 weeks and—" I quickly calculated in my head how much savings I had left after buying the motorcycle. "About $300 for parts." Lennox shook his head. "That's not enough, and you know it." "We'll figure something out," I said stubbornly. "We can use parts from other motorcycles, save money somewhere. The main thing is that it looks decent and starts up." "Audrey, this isn't fixing a bathroom faucet," Lennox sighed. "This is a major restoration. I'm not sure we can do it in such a short time and on such a budget." I turned to him, feeling the same stubbornness that had once driven me to fight for the lives of patients in the emergency room, even when others had given up, boiling up inside me. "Lennox Pryor, are you going to help me or not?" He looked at me for a long time, then sighed heavily. "Damn it, Audrey. Of course I'll help. When have I ever refused you?" I smiled, feeling relieved. "Thanks, old man." "Don't thank me yet, you old hag," he grumbled, but I could see the smile in the corners of his eyes. "We've got a lot of work to do." When I got home, I immediately sat down at the old computer Cliff had bought shortly before his death. I wasn't very tech-savvy, but I had learned how to use a search engine and email. I spent the next 2 hours researching everything I could find about the 1968 Bonneville T220, technical specifications, restoration features, potential problems. I made a list of necessary parts and a rough estimate of the costs. The result was disappointing. Even with the most modest estimates, we needed at least $700 to $800 just for basic parts, not to mention paint, chrome, and other cosmetic details. I closed my laptop and stared out the window. A light rain was falling outside, reflecting my mood. Maybe the idea was really too ambitious for my capabilities. My gaze fell on an old photo on the wall, me, Cliff, and little Eldon on a fishing trip. The boy was about 8 years old, proudly holding his first catch, a small perch. His face was beaming with happiness. I remembered how Eldon had called me after he was accepted into the rescue academy, how nervous he was before his first shift, how he told me about his first rescue operation. I had always been more than just a grandmother to him. I was his friend and ally. And now some family squabble was depriving me of the opportunity to be there for him on one of the most important days of his life. No, I couldn't just give up like that. There had to be a way to solve the financial problem. I opened my closet and took out an old tin box where I kept some valuable items. Among them was a pearl necklace that Cliff had given me on our 20th wedding anniversary. I rarely wore it. I didn't particularly like jewelry, and I hardly ever had a reason to go out. The pearls were real and probably worth a lot. I knew Cliff had saved up for them for almost a year. The thought of selling them made my heart ache, but I knew it was the most realistic way to get the money I needed. He would have understood, I thought, stroking the cool pearls. Cliff always valued practicality over sentimentality, and he loved his grandson as much as I did. It was decided. Tomorrow, I would take the necklace to a pawn shop in the city center. But first, I had to prepare a place to work on the motorcycle. I went down to the garage, which I had used mainly as a storage room since Cliff's death. I started clearing the space, moving boxes of old things, tools, and spare parts that my husband had never thrown away, believing that they would come in handy someday. "Looks like you were right, you old curmudgeon," I muttered as I discovered a box of metalworking tools. Many of them were old, but still in good condition. This could save us some money. By evening, when Lennox called to say he would bring the motorcycle tomorrow morning, the garage was ready. I even found old motorcycle blueprints and diagrams that Cliff had kept in his collection of technical literature. Lying in bed that night, I felt strangely excited. For the first time in a long time, I had a goal, a real challenge. It was almost like the old days in the hospital when a difficult patient came in, and everyone said there was little chance. But I stubbornly fought to the end. I knew it was a risky venture. Money was tight and time was even tighter. My knowledge of mechanics was limited to the basic skills Cliff had taught me. But now I had Lennox, and we both had stubbornness and determination. "We'll do it," I promised myself as I fell asleep. "We'll give Eldon his dream." The next few days flew by in a whirlwind of activity I hadn't experienced in years. Lennox brought the motorcycle early in the morning and we got to work right away. First, we took it apart completely to assess the condition of every part. The situation turned out to be both better and worse than we had expected. "The engine is in better shape than I thought," Lennox said, examining the inside of the motor. "Murdoch kept it in a dry place. Otherwise, the corrosion would have been much worse." "What about the transmission?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. After a few hours of work, they were already covered in a layer of machine oil and rust. Lennox shook his head. "That's where it's bad. We'll have to replace the clutch and possibly the gearbox." I nodded, mentally calculating the costs. The pearl necklace I had taken to the pawn shop yesterday had brought in $650. Less than I had hoped, but still a significant amount. "We'll manage," I said confidently. "What do we need to order first?" Lennox made a list of the most essential parts, and I immediately placed an order online at a specialized website he recommended. While we waited for the delivery, we cleaned and prepared the frame and other surviving parts. "You know, Audrey," Lennox said when we took a break for lunch on the second day of work, "I haven't seen you this lively in a long time." I took a sip of cold tea from my thermos. I guess I needed a real project. After I retired and Cliff died, I kind of froze. "I understand," he nodded. "When I closed the workshop, I felt the same way. People need a purpose." I looked at the partially dismantled motorcycle standing in the middle of the garage. My purpose is to see Eldon's face when he gets this motorcycle. What about his parents' faces? Lennox asked slyly. Especially your daughter-in-law's. I bet she won't be thrilled. I shrugged, trying to look indifferent. That'll be a nice bonus. We both laughed, and in that moment I realized I hadn't laughed so genuinely in a very long time. Work on the motorcycle progressed with varying degrees of success. Some parts arrived sooner than we expected, others were delayed. Lennox came every day, usually in the morning, and we worked late into the evening. I learned to distinguish between different types of wrenches at a glance, mastered the basics of sandblasting metal, and even helped with carburetor tuning. You could be a mechanic, Lennox remarked one day when I had taken apart and cleaned the fuel pump on my own. In another life, maybe, I replied. Although in medicine you also have to deal with mechanisms, only they're biological. While working on the motorcycle, I tried to find out more about Eldon's wedding. Garrett didn't call as promised, but that didn't surprise me. My son always avoided conflict and difficult conversations. Eldon himself didn't get in touch either, which was more unusual. He usually called me at least once a week. Apparently, he had been told about the decision not to invite me, and now he felt awkward. I decided to turn to Martha Donovan, an old friend whose daughter was a florist and often did wedding arrangements in Belmont. Martha, do you happen to know who's doing the flowers for my grandson's wedding? I asked casually when we ran into each other at the supermarket. Martha looked embarrassed. Actually, Audrey, Carol got the job. She didn't want to tell me because she knew you and I were friends and she felt awkward. It's all right, I assured her. I'm happy for Carol. I'm sure it's a good job. It's quite a big one, yes, Martha confirmed. Carol said the bride's family isn't skimping on expenses. I nodded, mentally noting the information. The Pearl family was clearly trying to impress. Are you going to the wedding? Martha asked cautiously. I paused, deciding how to respond. I didn't want to look like a pathetic, rejected grandmother. I have other plans for that day, I finally said. But I'll send a gift, of course. Martha clearly sensed that I wasn't telling her everything, but fortunately she didn't press the issue. On Thursday, about 10 days after we started our project, I drove to the pharmacy in the city center. Lennox and I needed special glue to stick the new seat covers on, and Joseph, another old acquaintance, had promised to get it for me. I was standing at the counter waiting for Joseph to find my order when I heard a familiar voice. And something for headaches, please. All this wedding planning is driving me crazy. I turned around and saw her, Pearl Hackett, my grandson's fiancée. We had only met a couple of times at family dinners, and each time the conversation had been awkward. She was a nice girl, but somehow superficial in my opinion. Always perfectly dressed with flawless makeup and manicured nails. At 25, she was already working as a pharmacist at a prestigious chain pharmacy in a neighboring town, and as far as I knew, her parents were wealthy. Her father owned a chain of building supply stores and her mother was a real estate agent. Pearl didn't notice me, completely absorbed in a conversation with the pharmacist about her headaches and stress. I could have quietly left, but something made me stay. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was a desire to better understand the situation. Pearl? I called out to her as she walked away from the counter with a bag of pills. She turned around, her face reflecting a whole range of emotions. Surprise, embarrassment, awkwardness. Mrs. Marsh, I didn't expect to see you here. Belmont is a small town, I smiled. How are you? How are the wedding preparations going? Pearl nervously smoothed her hair. Everything is going fine. Lots to do, of course, but everything's under control. I nodded. I can imagine. Weddings are always hectic. There was an awkward pause. It was obvious that Pearl didn't know how to act. She probably knew about the decision not to invite me, and now she felt guilty. How's Eldon? I asked, deciding not to press her. I haven't seen him in a while. Pearl relaxed a little. He's fine, working hard. You know, it's a busy time for the rescue service, forest fires and all that. Yes, he's always been a workaholic, I agreed. He takes after his father in that respect. At the mention of Clifford, Pearl's eyes softened slightly. Eldon talks about him a lot. I wish I'd had a chance to meet him. This surprised me. I didn't know Eldon often mentioned his grandfather in conversation with his fiancée. Perhaps there was a deeper connection between them than I had realized. Cliff would have approved of his choice, I said sincerely. He always said that the most important qualities in a woman were intelligence and a kind heart. Pearl blushed slightly. Thank you, Mrs. Marsh. That means a lot. I decided to take a chance. Give Eldon my best regards. Tell him what I think of him and wish you both happiness. Pearl bit her lip. I will. Mrs. Marsh, about the wedding. I want you to know. At that moment, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and sighed. I'm sorry, it's my mother. I have to take this. Of course, I nodded. I won't keep you. Pearl answered the call and quickly left the pharmacy, giving me a guilty look as she left. I stood at the counter, thinking about our short conversation. Here's your glue, Audrey. Joseph returned with a small tube. Sorry for the delay. Thanks, Joseph, I said, reaching for my wallet. Do you know the Hackett family? Pearl's parents? Joseph looked around as if to check that no one was listening, then lowered his voice. Of course I do. It's hard not to know the Hacketts in our neighborhood. They're the kind of people who like everything to be by the book. Especially Victoria, Pearl's mother. I remember how she made such a fuss at the city library because her daughter's book was returned a day late. Really? I raised an eyebrow. Oh, yes, Joseph nodded. They care a lot about their status, let's say. When Derek Hackett opened his first store, they lived very modestly. Now they have a mansion outside of town, and Victoria acts like she's always been part of high society. That explained a lot. If Pearl's parents were so concerned about social status, then a blunt, straightforward nurse grandmother hardly fit into their idea of a proper wedding. I see, I said, paying for the glue. Thanks for the information, Joseph. You're welcome, Audrey, he smiled. And good luck with your project. I returned home, where Lennox was waiting for me, ready to continue working on the motorcycle. He immediately noticed my pensive mood. Something happened? I told him about my encounter with Pearl at the pharmacy. You know, Lennox, I'm starting to think it's not so much about the Christmas incident or my strained relationship with Veronica. It seems like the main pressure is coming from Pearl's parents. They don't want some rude old nurse ruining their perfect wedding. Does that change your plans? Lennox asked, opening a can of solvent. I smiled. Not at all. On the contrary, now I want to finish this motorcycle even more and see the look on the Hackett's faces when their future son-in-law receives a vintage Triumph from that very same uninvited grandmother. Lennox grinned. That's my Audrey, always ready for battle. We returned to work with renewed enthusiasm. By this point, the engine had been almost completely restored, the transmission replaced, and the frame cleaned of rust and prepared for painting. There was still a lot of work to do. The electrical system, the brakes, the paint job, the assembly. But the progress was evident. That evening, after Lennox left, I sat in the living room looking through old photo albums. I found a picture of Eldon, about 17 years old, standing next to Cliff in our garage. They were both smiling, dirty and happy. They had just finished repairing my husband's old Ford. I remembered how Eldon had come to see me after Cliff died. He spent a whole week with me, helping me sort through my husband's things, repairing the leaky roof, and trimming the overgrown garden. All the things his grandfather used to do. Grandma, I'll always be here for you, he said then. Just give me a call. And he really did always come when I called. He helped with the housework, or just stopped by for a chat or a cup of tea. Until last year, when his relationship with Pearl became serious and his visits became less frequent. I didn't blame him. Youth has its priorities. But now, thinking about our conversation with Pearl, I began to realize that perhaps the reason wasn't that Eldon had forgotten about me or stopped caring. Most likely, he was simply caught between two worlds, the world of his fiancée with her ambitious parents and the world of his family with its history and traditions. How often had I found myself in a similar situation when I was younger? Trying to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. I wonder if Eldon knows about the decision not to invite me. Did he approve of it? Or maybe he tried to object but was persuaded by more insistent voices. I sighed as I closed the album. Whatever the answers to those questions, my plan remained unchanged. I would give Eldon the motorcycle of his dreams. And perhaps that gesture would be the bridge that helped him find balance between his past and his future. Lennon and I worked especially hard over the next few days. The motorcycle was starting to take shape. You could already see the classic silhouette of a Triumph Bonneville. We chose a deep blue color with silver accents for the paint job. Not exactly an original color scheme for this model, but according to Lennox, damn impressive. Only 5 days left until the wedding, Lennox remarked as we finished up on Friday evening. Will we make it? We have to, I said firmly. Even if we have to work around the clock. He nodded. We'll do the paint job tomorrow. Then we'll let it dry for a day or two, and all that will be left is the final assembly and tuning. Sounds like a plan, I agreed. When Lennox left, I stayed in the garage for a while, admiring our work. The motorcycle no longer looked like a pile of scrap metal. It was almost a finished classic bike, just needing the finishing touches. I ran my hand over the gas tank, imagining how it would look after it was painted. I could already see Eldon's face when he saw this motorcycle. His dream come true. We're almost done, Cliff, I said quietly to the empty garage. I wish you were here. You would have loved it. That night, I lay awake for a long time thinking about the upcoming wedding, about Eldon, about Pearl and her family. I remembered our brief encounter at the pharmacy and how she had wanted to tell me something about the wedding before her phone rang. Maybe she wanted to apologize or explain the situation, or maybe it was just a formal expression of regret that meant nothing. I rolled over onto my other side, trying to find a comfortable position. Whatever her intentions were, it didn't matter anymore. My plan was in motion, and soon everyone would see the result. With that thought, I finally fell asleep, and I dreamed of Cliff sitting on his shiny blue motorcycle, smiling at me with his familiar, slightly crooked smile. The next morning, Lennox and I began the painting process. He insisted on doing it in his old garage, where there was better ventilation and less dust. Painting is an art, Audrey, he said seriously. One speck of dust, and it's ruined. I didn't argue. During our time working together, I had learned to trust his experience when it came to motorcycles. We carefully loaded the prepared parts into his pickup truck and drove to his garage on the outskirts of town. There, Lennox turned into a true artist, methodically applying layer after layer to achieve the perfect finish. I helped as best I could, handing him tools, holding parts, and monitoring the temperature in the room. By evening, most of the work was done, and the motorcycle parts, now painted a deep blue, were laid out on tables and shelves to dry. It looks amazing, I said, admiring the result. Of course, Lennox replied proudly. When we're done, this Triumph will look better than new. We agreed to meet in 2 days for the final assembly, when the paint was completely dry. That left us 2 days before the wedding, cutting it close, but doable. On my way home, I stopped at the supermarket for groceries and unexpectedly ran into Martha. She looked embarrassed when she saw me. Audrey, I was just about to call you. What's wrong? I asked, noticing her unusual behavior. Martha looked around as if afraid someone was listening. Didn't you hear? Eldon and Pearl's wedding has been postponed. It's now in 3 days. My heart skipped a beat. What? Why? Something to do with Eldon's work, Martha shrugged. Carol is in a panic. She had to change all the flower arrangements. And the restaurant isn't happy either. 3 days. That meant we only had 2 days to finish the motorcycle. An almost impossible task, considering that the paint needed time to dry completely. Thanks for letting me know, Martha, I said, trying to sound calm and not betray my anxiety. I have to go. As soon as I got in the car, I dialed Lennox's number. We have a problem, I said as soon as he answered. The wedding has been moved up. It's in 3 days. There was a pause. Holy shit, Lennox finally exhaled. That complicates things. Can we make it? I asked bluntly. I don't know, Audrey. The paint needs at least 48 hours at our temperature. Then there's the assembly, the tuning. But it's possible? I insisted. Lennox sighed. Theoretically, yes. Practically, we'll have to work nonstop and pray that nothing goes wrong. Then that's what we'll do, I said decisively. I'll come over tomorrow morning and we'll start assembling as soon as possible. Okay, he agreed. Bring coffee. Lots of coffee. I hung up and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Changing the wedding date was an unexpected obstacle, but I wasn't going to give up. Not after everything we'd already done. Driving past Lakeview Gardens, I noticed a flurry of activity. Obviously, the restaurant staff was also rearranging their plans for the new date. Veronique's familiar silver Lexus was in the parking lot. I slowed down, wondering if I should stop and ask my daughter-in-law what was going on, but I quickly dismissed the idea. Veronique was the last person I wanted to discuss the wedding with, especially now. Instead, I drove home, mentally going over everything we still had to do with the motorcycle and figuring out how to fit it all into such a short time frame. We'll manage, I told myself as I parked outside my house. We have to. The next morning started at 4 o'clock for me. I couldn't sleep, knowing how little time we had left. I made strong coffee, packed sandwiches for the day, and by 5:30 I was at Lennox's garage door. He didn't open right away, sleepy and rumpled. God, Audrey, are you crazy? The sun isn't even up yet. We don't have much time, I said, handing him the thermos of coffee. Drink up and wake up. We need to check how dry the paint is. Lennox took the thermos, took a sip, and grimaced. Strong as tar, but it works. Come on in. The garage was dimly lit, with faint light filtering through the small windows near the ceiling. Lennox turned on the lights and I saw our motorcycle, or rather its disassembled parts, still laid out to dry. Let's check it out, Lennox said, carefully touching the gas tank. The surface isn't sticky anymore, but the paint isn't completely dry yet. Ideally, it needs at least another 12 hours. We don't have 12 hours, I objected. The wedding is the day after tomorrow. We need to assemble the motorcycle today and make sure it works, and then deliver it tomorrow. Lennox scratched the back of his head. We could risk starting the assembly tonight. If we're very careful, we won't damage the paint. But rushing something like this, I know, I interrupted. But we don't have a choice. We decided that we'd spend the day getting all the other parts ready, and then in the evening, when the paint is dried a little more, we'll start the final assembly. Lennox worked on the electrical system, the wires, headlights, and signals. I polished the chrome parts that didn't need to be painted. We both worked silently, knowing that the success of the entire project depended on our concentration. By noon, Lennox had finished the electrical work and started on the brake system. I finished polishing and started helping him. You know, Audrey, he said, tightening the bolts on the brake cylinder. I never asked you why you weren't invited to your grandson's wedding. What happened that Christmas? I sighed, remembering that evening. Nothing much, really. We were all at Garrett and Veronica's house. Pearl brought her parents. Everything was fine until Victoria Hackett started talking about how they sent Pearl to private school, and then to a prestigious college, and how important the right education is for success in life. Lennox snorted. I can imagine how much you enjoyed that. I would have kept quiet, really. But then she looked at Eldon and said something like, Of course not everyone chooses the academic path. Some are better suited to practical work. And she patted his hand condescendingly. And Eldon? He smiled and said nothing. He tries to avoid conflict in general, like Garrett, like Cliff. But not like you, Lennox grinned. Not like me, I agreed. I said that a practical work, as she put it, saves lives, while many with the right education just shuffle papers around, and that Eldon had chosen a noble profession to be proud of, not apologize for. And then what happened? There was silence. Then Victoria said that she certainly respected all professions, but that education opened doors to a better life. I replied that better life was a relative concept, and for some people it wasn't about the size of their bank account, but about the meaning of what they did. Lennox shook his head. That's it? That doesn't sound like a scandal that would keep you from being invited to a wedding. That was just the beginning, I admitted. Then Veronica tried to change the subject and talked about her new diamond ring that Garrett gave her for their anniversary. Derek Hackett, Pearl's father, remarked that it was a cute little ring. I couldn't resist and said that some men give diamonds to compensate for something else they lack. Lennox laughed. Audrey Marsh, you didn't do that. I did. I couldn't hold back a smile. Veronica almost choked on her turkey. Victoria turned pale. Derek blushed. And Pearl, she just got up and left the room. And Eldon? My smile faded. He looked at me as if I had betrayed him. Then he followed Pearl. They returned half an hour later, but the evening was hopelessly ruined. The Hackett family left soon after. I haven't seen them since, until I ran into Pearl at the pharmacy. Lennox shook his head. You sure know how to throw a party, I'll give you that. I was wrong, I admitted. I shouldn't have ruined the evening with my barbs. It's just that snobbery, that arrogance. It's always bothered me. Because you achieved everything you have on your own, Lennox remarked, without private schools or rich parents. I nodded. Probably, but that's no excuse. I should have kept my mouth shut, especially for Eldon's sake. And that's why you're trying so hard with this motorcycle? To make up for it? I thought for a moment. Not only that, I want Eldon to know that no matter what, I'm always on his side. And I want everyone else to know that too. Lennox smiled. Then let's make this motorcycle perfect. We returned to work with renewed energy. By evening, as the sun began to set, Lennox announced that it was time to begin the final assembly. The paint isn't perfect yet, he warned, but if we're careful, everything should be fine. The assembly was the most difficult part of the whole process. Every detail had to be in its place. Every bolt had to be tightened with the right amount of force. The slightest mistake could result in the motorcycle simply not starting, or worse, starting but being unsafe to ride. We worked slowly and methodically. I handed him the parts and Lennox installed them, periodically consulting the technical diagrams we had printed out at the beginning of the project. Pass me the 14 socket wrench, Lennox asked as he installed the exhaust system. I handed him the tool, feeling my back ache from standing in an awkward position for so long. Maybe we should take a break, I suggested. It's almost 10 o'clock. Lennox shook his head. No time, Audrey. If we stop now, we'll have to start all over again tomorrow. Let's get it to a certain point first. He was right, of course. We continued working, and by midnight, the basic structure of the motorcycle was assembled. It looked almost finished, a shiny blue beauty with chrome accents, a real Bonneville Triumph at its best. That's enough for today, Lennox finally said, wiping his hands with a rag. Tomorrow we'll install the last few parts and see if it starts. I nodded, feeling a wave of fatigue wash over me. Thanks, Lennox. I could never have done it without you. Don't thank me yet, he smiled. We're not done yet. The next morning I was back at his garage early, though not as early as the day before. Lennox was already working, installing the seat and handlebars. Good morning, he greeted me. How did you sleep? Not very well, I admitted. I kept thinking about the motorcycle and about tomorrow. Lennox nodded. I understand, but let's finish the job first. By noon, the motorcycle was completely assembled. It stood in the middle of the garage, gleaming in the sunlight streaming through the windows. A true work of art. Ready for the moment of truth? Lennox asked, handing me the key. I took a deep breath. Let's do this. Lennox explained how to start the motorcycle, the specifics of older models, the position of the throttle, the features of the Kickstarter. I listened carefully, memorizing every detail so that I could repeat everything on my own if necessary. Finally, I sat down on the motorcycle, feeling the leather seat sag under my weight. I turned on the ignition, set the throttle as Lennox had shown me, and pressed the Kickstarter with all my strength. Nothing happened. Again, harder, Lennox encouraged me. I tried again, and again. On the fifth or sixth try, the engine finally roared to life with a characteristic growl. Yes, Lennox exclaimed, raising his arms in the air. It's working! I sat there, feeling the motorcycle vibrate beneath me, listening to the steady rumble of the engine. It was a success. We had actually done it, restored a vintage Triumph Bonneville in less than 3 weeks, on a limited budget and with minimal experience. We did it, I echoed my thoughts aloud. We really did it. Not just did it, Lennox said proudly. We built a damn beautiful motorcycle. Eldon is going to be thrilled. I turned off the engine and climbed off the bike. Tears welled up in my eyes, from exhaustion, from relief, from pride in our work. Thank you, Lennox. Really, thank you. He waved his hand dismissively. It's nothing. I haven't had this much fun in a long time, and he paused. I think Cliff would have been proud. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Yes, Cliff would have been proud. He had always loved creating things with his hands, and he loved his grandson. This project combined both. So, what's the plan for tomorrow? Lennox asked, breaking the emotional moment, for which I was grateful. I found out that the ceremony is scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I said. The newlyweds are spending the night before the wedding at River Lodge, a small hotel near Lakeview Gardens. I'm thinking of taking the motorcycle there in the morning before all the commotion starts. Good plan, Lennox nodded. I'll help you load it onto the trailer and take it there. Thanks, but from now on I want to do this myself, I said firmly. This has to be my gesture, my gift. Lennox smiled understandingly. As you say, Audrey. But if you need me, just give me a call. We spent the rest of the day making final preparations, adjusting the carburetor for a smoother ride, polishing all the chrome parts to a shine, and checking the tire pressure. I wrote a short note to Eldon, which I planned to attach to the motorcycle. Dear Eldon, I remember your dream. May it always be with you, as is my love, Grandma Audrey. Simple and sincere, without unnecessary words or explanations. As the sun began to set, we finished our final preparations. The motorcycle was ready, flawless, gleaming, as if it had just rolled off the assembly line in 1968. It's perfect, I said, admiring our work. I agree, Lennox nodded. The best restoration I've ever done. And believe me, I've seen a lot. We loaded the motorcycle onto Lennox's trailer, secured it with safety straps, and covered it with a tarp. I'll pick it up tomorrow at 7 and take it to River Lodge, I said. Hopefully I'll be there before Eldon and Pearl get up. Call me when you get there, Lennox asked. I'll be waiting for news. I hugged him, feeling a gratitude that was difficult to put into words. I'll be sure to call. When I got home, I found my neighbor Doris Fletcher waiting for me on the porch. Doris was a typical representative of the nosy neighbor category, always up on the latest gossip, always ready to share news. Audrey, I've been waiting for you for an hour, she exclaimed as soon as I got out of the car. Hello, Doris, I smiled wearily. Is something wrong? Haven't you heard? She lowered her voice to a dramatic whisper. Tomorrow's wedding. It's all anyone can talk about. I tensed up. What about her? Veronique is hysterical, Doris reported with obvious pleasure. The florist is sick and no one can replace her, and Victoria Hackett insists that the wedding must be perfect. I heard they even thought about postponing the ceremony, but everyone has already arrived, and the hotel is booked, and… Doris, I interrupted her. How do you know all this? She smiled smugly. My niece works at Lakeview Gardens. She saw everything with her own eyes. I nodded, mentally noting that tomorrow at River Lodge might be more hectic than I had anticipated. Thanks for the information, Doris. I'm very tired and would like to rest. Of course, she clapped her hands. Just think, such an important day, and such problems. It's a good thing you don't have to deal with it since you weren't invited. She added the last sentence with a special intonation, clearly hoping for a reaction from me. But I just shrugged. Yes, I'm lucky. Good night, Doris. I entered the house, leaving my neighbor a little disappointed by the lack of drama. Inside, I sank onto the sofa, feeling the fatigue of the last few weeks wash over me. Everything was ready for tomorrow. The motorcycle was repaired, the delivery plan was made. All that was left to do was wait. And now, with no tasks requiring immediate attention, doubts and fears began to creep into my mind. What if Eldon wasn't happy with the motorcycle? What if Pearl or her parents saw it as an attempt to ruin the wedding? What if Garrett and Veronica got even angrier? I remembered Eldon's expression at that Christmas dinner, disappointment mixed with hurt. What if I saw the same expression tomorrow? No, I said firmly to myself. Eldon loves motorcycles. It's his dream. He'll be thrilled. But the worm of doubt had already settled in my heart, poisoning the joy of a completed project. I got up and went to the window, looking at the starry sky. Somewhere out there, Eldon might also be awake, thinking about tomorrow, about his wedding, about the future, about his new family. And I thought about the past, about the little boy who could spend hours looking at a book about motorcycles, about the teenager who dreamed of freedom and speed, about the young man who chose to become a lifeguard against his parents' wishes. I hoped that my gift would become a bridge between his past and his future, a reminder that some dreams are worth holding on to, even when life changes. With that thought, I finally went to bed, knowing that tomorrow would be an important day. The day when I would find out if this whole project was an act of love or just another mistake on my part, another instance of my character and stubbornness creating problems for those I love. I tossed and turned in bed for a long time, running through different scenarios for tomorrow in my head. I saw Eldon's face, smiling, then disappointed. I imagined the reactions of Pearl, the Hacketts, Garrett, and Veronica. At one point, I even thought about giving up the whole thing. Just leave the motorcycle at Lennox's and give it to his grandson later, in less dramatic circumstances. But something inside me, the same stubbornness that sometimes caused problems and sometimes helped solve them, told me that I had to see it through, that it was important not only for Eldon, but for me as well. In the end, exhaustion got the better of me, and I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of Cliff sitting on the Triumph Bonneville, saying something I couldn't make out. I tried to get closer to hear him, but he kept moving away, and the motorcycle grew smaller and smaller on the horizon. I woke up to the alarm clock at 5:30 a.m., feeling unrested but determined. Today was the day everyone would find out that old Audrey Marsh wasn't so easy to give up on, and that she was not only capable of ruining holidays with her sharp tongue, but also of creating real miracles with her own hands. I quickly got ready, drank a cup of strong coffee, and left the house. The morning air was fresh, and the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Perfect wedding weather, I thought as I got into the car. When I pulled up to Lennox's garage, he was already waiting for me, standing next to the trailer where our masterpiece was hidden under a tarp. "Ready?" he asked with a smile. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." Lennox helped me hook the trailer to my car, checked the fastenings one more time, and shook my hand. "Good luck, Audrey. You've done something special. Don't forget that, no matter what happens." "Thanks, Lennox, for everything." I got behind the wheel and slowly pulled away, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the trailer behind me. The drive to River Lodge took about 20 minutes. During that time, I went over the plan in my head one more time. Park in the hotel parking lot, unload the motorcycle, attach the note, call the front desk and ask them to notify Eldon about the delivery. Simple and clear. No unnecessary drama or scenes. When I pulled up to River Lodge, the sun had already risen, painting the sky in soft pink tones. The hotel was a two-story building in the style of a country cottage, surrounded by pine trees. There were several cars in the parking lot, but it was quiet. It seemed that most of the guests were still asleep. I chose a spot away from the entrance and parked carefully. Now came the hardest part, unloading the motorcycle without damaging it or making any noise. I opened the trailer, removed the tarp, and froze for a moment, admiring our work. In the morning light, the Triumph looked even more impressive, deep blue, with silver accents and chrome details that sparkled like a mirror. "You'd be proud, Cliff," I thought, as I took out the ramp to lower the motorcycle. With some difficulty but carefully, I rolled the heavy machine out of the trailer. Silence hung in the air, broken only by the singing of early birds and the rustling of leaves. I took the note out of my pocket, attached it to the handlebars, and took a deep breath. Now all that was left was to call the front desk and let them know it had arrived. I took out my phone, found the hotel number, and was about to press the call button when I heard a voice behind me. "Grandma?" I turned around and saw him, Eldon, my grandson, standing a few steps away from me in sweatpants and a t-shirt, clearly out for his morning jog. His eyes were wide, his gaze moving from me to the motorcycle and back. "Eldon," I breathed, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. "Good morning." "What are you doing here?" he asked, taking a step forward. "And what is that?" He fell silent as his gaze focused on the motorcycle. I saw the emotions flash across his face: surprise, recognition, disbelief. Is that a Triumph Bonneville?" he whispered, coming closer. 68? I nodded, not trusting my voice. "But where? How?" He walked around the motorcycle, examining it from all sides, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Grandma, this is amazing! There was such sincere admiration in his voice that all my fears and doubts instantly vanished. I smiled, feeling the tension of the last few weeks of my vacation melt away. Happy wedding day, Eldon. Eldon stared at the motorcycle, unable to hide his admiration. His fingers gently slid over the handlebars, the chrome details, the immaculately polished gas tank. His face lit up with that boyish smile I remembered so well from his childhood. Grandma, this is incredible, he said, finally tearing his gaze away from the motorcycle. But how? Where did you find it? Models like this are really rare. I smiled, feeling the warmth of his reaction spread through me. I found it at the Murdoch junkyard. Lennox and I restored it. You restored it? Eldon looked from the motorcycle to my hands, as if only now noticing the calluses and scratches from 3 weeks of intense work. Grandma, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I said, walking over and handing him the keys. This is your wedding gift. I remember how you always dreamed of one like this. Eldon took the keys, but instead of getting on the motorcycle right away, as I expected, he stepped forward and hugged me tightly. I felt his strong lifeguard arms squeeze my shoulders, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees. Thank you, he whispered in my ear. This is the best gift I've ever received. We stood there for a few seconds, then he pulled away and I saw tears in his eyes. My heart sank. I hadn't expected such an emotional reaction. Want to try it out? I asked, nodding toward the motorcycle. Lennox says it's in perfect condition. We checked it yesterday. Eldon nodded, quickly wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Sure, I'd love to. He carefully got on the motorcycle, inserted the key into the ignition, and turned it. Then, following his intuition, or perhaps remembering something from a book he had read, he set the throttle correctly and pressed the kickstarter. The motorcycle didn't start right away, just like with Lennox, but on the third try, the engine roared to life, filling the morning air with its characteristic rumble. Eldon's face lit up with such joy that it took my breath away. At that moment, he looked more like Cliff than ever. The same facial features, the same sincere smile, the same love of mechanics. It's beautiful, Eldon shouted over the noise of the engine. Just perfect. I smiled, feeling that all the effort and hardship of the past few weeks had been worth it, worth that smile on my grandson's face. Eldon turned off the engine and climbed off the motorcycle. Grandma, I don't know how to thank you. This is the best, most thoughtful gift ever. I'm glad you like it, I replied simply. I wanted you to have something special for this day. His expression changed, becoming more serious. Grandma, about the wedding. I'm so sorry you weren't invited. I tried to talk to my parents, but I raised my hand to stop him. It's okay, Eldon, I understand. After that Christmas dinner. It's not just that. He shook his head. It's all complicated. Pearl's parents are very insistent when it comes to planning. They want everything to be perfect according to their standards. And Veronica, you know how she is. I nodded. I knew, of course. Anyway, I don't want to ruin your wedding day, I said sincerely. I just wanted to give you a gift. Eldon looked at me, clearly struggling with himself. Then he shook his head decisively. No, that won't do. You have to be there. This is my day, and I want my grandmother to be there. Eldon, don't make this difficult, I said gently. I don't want to cause problems between you and Pearl, or you and your parents. You're not causing problems, he said firmly. They are. Look, I'll talk to Pearl. She'll understand, I'm sure. And your parents, well, they'll just have to deal with it. I saw determination in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Maybe there was more of me in him than I thought. Eldon, honey, are you sure? Today is your day and I don't want it to be overshadowed by family disagreements. He took my hands. Grandma, you restored the motorcycle of my dreams for me. You put your time, energy, and savings into it. If I can't find the courage to insist that you be at my wedding, then I'm not worth anything as a man. His voice sounded so convincing that I didn't argue. I felt warmth spreading inside me. Not triumph or self-satisfaction, but simply pure, unclouded love for this young man in whom I saw the best qualities of our family. Let's go. Eldon took me by the arm. Pearl should be waking up soon. I want her to see the motorcycle too. And you. We rode the motorcycle to the hotel entrance, attracting the attention of the few early guests. The doorman whistled respectfully when he saw the Triumph. What a machine! Is it yours, sir? It's mine now, Eldon replied proudly. A wedding gift from my grandmother. The doorman looked at me, and his eyes filled with new respect. You're a great grandmother, ma'am. I smiled. I try. We left the motorcycle at the entrance under the watchful eye of the impressed doorman and entered the hotel. The lobby was quiet, with only a sleepy receptionist behind the desk. Good morning, Mr. Marsh, he greeted Eldon. Early jog? Yes, and a very good one, Eldon smiled. Tell me, is my fiancée awake yet? I'm not sure, sir, but her parents came down about half an hour ago. They're in the restaurant having breakfast. Eldon nodded and turned to me. Grandma, let's talk to Pearl's parents first. It would be better if I explained the situation to them before they see you with Pearl. I felt a slight uneasiness. Meeting the Hacketts wasn't part of my plans, especially after the Christmas incident. But I understood Eldon's reasoning. As you say, I agreed. You know better how to deal with future in-laws. We headed to the hotel restaurant, a small but elegant room with panoramic windows overlooking the river. Derek and Victoria Hackett were sitting at one of the tables by the window studying the menu. They looked exactly as I remembered them, well-groomed, expensively dressed with expressions that said, "We're better than you." Eldon squeezed my hand to let me know everything would be fine, and we approached their table. Good morning, Eldon said. The Hacketts looked up and smiled when they saw their future son-in-law. Then their eyes shifted to me, and their smiles froze. Mrs. Marsh? Victoria Hackett clearly couldn't believe her eyes. What are you doing here? My grandmother came to give me a wedding gift, Eldon replied calmly before I could open my mouth. And I invited her to stay for the ceremony. There was a tense silence. Derek Hackett frowned. Eldon, we discussed this. A decision was made. No one considered my opinion when that decision was made, Eldon interrupted firmly. Today is my day, and it's Pearl's day, and I want my grandmother to be here. I had never seen my grandson so determined. He usually avoided conflict like his father and grandfather. But now there was steel in his voice. Victoria Hackett pressed her lips into a thin line. Eldon, dear, I understand how you feel, but we've already made all the arrangements. The seating is set, the menu has been agreed upon. Add another chair, Eldon said with a smile, but there was determination in his eyes. I'm sure the chef can handle an extra serving. The Hacketts exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond to such unexpected firmness. What will Pearl say? Victoria finally asked. And Eldon's parents? They were pretty adamant about this. I'll talk to Pearl, Eldon replied, and to my parents too. But first, I'd like you to see the gift my grandmother gave me. I think it will change your opinion of her. He gestured for them to follow him outside. The Hacketts reluctantly got up from the table and followed us. When we left the hotel and they saw the motorcycle, their reaction was interesting. Derek Hackett froze, examining the Triumph with an expert eye. Is that a real 1968 Bonneville? In this condition? Yes, Eldon replied proudly. My grandmother found it in a junkyard and restored it with her mechanic friend. Restored it? Victoria looked at me, her eyes filled with disbelief. You? I shrugged. I had good hands and an excellent teacher. My husband taught me not to be afraid of tools. Derek slowly walked around the motorcycle, examining it from all sides. It was clear that he really understood the mechanics. That's impressive, he finally said. A restoration like that must have cost a lot of money, and it requires real skill. Thank you, I replied modestly. It was a labor of love. Victoria looked less impressed, but her face softened when she saw how admiringly her husband was looking at the motorcycle. Eldon, are you sure it's safe? She asked anxiously. Old motorcycles like that. Lennox and I checked every detail, I assured her. It's perfectly safe. And I have all the paperwork for it, registered, insured, ready to go. Derek raised an eyebrow. You really thought of everything. At that moment, Pearl emerged from the hotel doors in a light summer dress. She stopped when she saw the unusual group at the entrance. Eldon? Mom? Dad? What's going on? Her gaze shifted to me and she visibly tensed. Mrs. Marsh? Good morning, dear. Eldon walked over to her and put his arms around her shoulders. Grandma came to give us a wedding present. Well, for me. But I wanted you to see it too. He led her to the motorcycle. Remember I told you about the Triumph Bonneville? How I've wanted one since I was a teenager? Pearl nodded slowly, her eyes sliding over the motorcycle. Yes, of course I remember. You said it was the most beautiful motorcycle ever made. My grandmother found it and restored it for me, Eldon said proudly. Isn't it amazing? Pearl looked at me and I saw a mixture of emotions in her eyes, surprise, admiration, and something else, something like guilt. That's amazing, Mrs. Marsh, she said sincerely. I know how much it means to Eldon. I smiled. Thank you, dear. And please call me Audrey. Pearl nodded, then looked at her parents as if gauging their reaction. Derek was still admiring the motorcycle and Victoria looked pensive. Pearl, Eldon began, taking her hand. I want Grandma to be at our wedding. She has to be there. I expected objections, but Pearl surprised me. Of course she has to be there, she said firmly, especially after such a gift. Eldon, I have something to tell you. I tried to talk to my parents about inviting your grandmother a week ago, but we were too stubborn, Victoria Hackett interrupted unexpectedly, and perhaps too quick to judge you, Mrs. Marsh. I struggled to hide my surprise. That was the last thing I expected to hear from this woman. A gift like that, Victoria continued, nodding toward the motorcycle, speaks of deep affection and understanding, of a true family bond. Derek and I have always valued family ties. The last sentence sounded a little pompous, but I appreciated the attempt to mend relations. Thank you, Mrs. Hackett, I replied. I value family too, and I love my grandson very much. Victoria nodded. That's obvious, and I think you should be at the wedding, as Eldon's guest. Eldon beamed. Thank you, Mrs. Hackett. That means a lot to me. Pearl smiled too, and to my surprise, came over and hugged me. I'm glad you'll be with us, Audrey, and I'm sorry about this whole situation. I should have insisted more. I hugged her back, feeling that perhaps I hadn't been entirely fair in my initial assessment of this girl. Maybe she had more strength and character than I had given her credit for. Don't apologize, dear. It's all right. Our moment of reconciliation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up. A silver Lexus pulled up at the hotel entrance, and Garrett and Veronica stepped out. My son looked tired, and his wife looked tense. The final preparations for the wedding had obviously been difficult for them. They noticed our group and froze. Veronica paled when she saw me, and Garrett nervously ran his hand through his hair, his usual gesture when he didn't know how to react. Mom, he finally managed to say. What are you doing here? Before I could answer, Eldon stepped forward. Grandma brought me a wedding present, he said, pointing to the motorcycle. And she'll be at the ceremony, as my guest. Veronique opened her mouth, clearly about to object, but Garrett surprised everyone by placing his hand on her shoulder. All right, he said calmly. If that's what you want, son. Garrett, Veronique hissed indignantly. We discussed this. Yes, we did, my son said firmly. And maybe we were wrong. He walked over to the motorcycle, examining it with obvious interest. Did you do this, Mom? Did you restore it? I nodded. With Lennox's help, but yes, we did most of the work together. Garrett shook his head and a smile appeared on his face, a rare sight in recent years. That's amazing. You've always been full of surprises. He turned to Veronica, who still looked unhappy. Look at this motorcycle, honey. It's a work of art, and Mom did it for our son. Veronique reluctantly approached, examining the Triumph. Her face remained tense, but I noticed a glimmer of respect in her eyes. It's impressive, she finally said, holding back. But Audrey, that doesn't change the fact that your comments at Christmas were inappropriate and hurtful. You're right, I agreed, deciding that now was not the time for pride. I was harsh and unrestrained, and I apologize. Victoria Hackett raised an eyebrow slightly, clearly not expecting that from me. Veronica also looked surprised. Well, okay, she said after a pause. I accept your apology. It wasn't the warmest reconciliation, but it was a start. Eldon, standing next to Pearl, smiled as he looked at us. So, Derek Hackett said, breaking the awkward silence, I think we need to let the restaurant know that there will be another guest. And maybe we should think about where to park that beautiful motorcycle. It would be great if it could be at the entrance to Lakeview Gardens during the ceremony. Excellent idea, Mr. Hackett, Eldon agreed enthusiastically. Grandma, what do you think? I smiled. If you want your motorcycle to be part of the ceremony, I'm all for it. My motorcycle? Eldon shook his head with a smile. I still can't believe it. A 1968 Bonneville Triumph, my dream. I saw how Pearl looked at it with love, and at that moment I realized that maybe I hadn't been entirely fair to her. She really loved my grandson with all his dreams and passions. Well, said Victoria, glancing at her watch, we all need to get ready. The ceremony is in a few hours, and we still have a lot to do. Everyone nodded in agreement, and the group began to disperse. Eldon lingered to hug me again. Thank you, Grandma. For the motorcycle, and for being you. You're welcome, dear, I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. See you at the ceremony. He nodded and ran after Pearl. I stood alone at the hotel entrance next to the motorcycle that had completely changed the situation. The doorman, who had been watching the whole scene from the sidelines, approached me. What a dramatic turn of events, ma'am. You got what you wanted. I smiled. I just wanted to give my grandson his dream. Everything else is a nice bonus. The ceremony at Lakeview Gardens was just as I had imagined, elegant, meticulously planned, with an abundance of flowers and champagne. The motorcycle, as Derek Hackett had suggested, stood at the entrance, attracting the admiring glances of the guests. I sat in the back row, modestly dressed in a dark blue dress I had bought a year ago for a friend's funeral and had never worn. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. This day belonged to Eldon and Pearl. When the ceremony began and Pearl walked down the aisle on her father's arm, I couldn't help but notice how beautiful she looked in her white dress. And when Eldon, standing at the altar, turned to meet her, the look of pure happiness on his face brought tears to my eyes. They exchanged vows, and I noticed that Eldon had added a phrase about supporting the entire family, including wise grandmothers with golden hands, to his vow. This made the guests laugh and brought a smile to my tear-stained face. After the ceremony, during the reception, I stood aside, watching the happy couple and their guests. Victoria Hackett approached me with a glass of champagne. Here, she said, handing me the glass. I thought you might be lonely here in the corner. I accepted the champagne with gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Hackett. Victoria, please, she said with a slight smile. After all, we're family now. I nodded. Victoria. And call me Audrey. We stood together, watching Eldon and Pearl dance their first dance as husband and wife. You know, Victoria said after a pause, Derek and I weren't always well off. We had a very difficult start. Maybe that's why I strive so hard for everything to be perfect, so that no one can say we're not good enough. I looked at her with new understanding. I never thought you weren't good enough, Victoria. It's just that sometimes I'm too straightforward. She smiled. And I'm too focused on outward appearances. Maybe we both have something to learn from each other. We clinked glasses, and I felt that perhaps, if not friendship, then at least mutual respect was beginning to form between us. Later, Garrett approached me. He looked a little awkward but determined. Mom, I wanted to apologize for not insisting on your invitation, for letting this get so far. I shook my head. Don't apologize, Garrett. You were caught between a rock and a hard place. I understand. It doesn't matter. He looked genuinely upset. I should have shown more character. Like Eldon today. He's a good man, I agreed proudly. He's got guts. So do you, Garrett smiled. That motorcycle? That's something. I can't believe you did that yourself. Well, not entirely, I replied modestly. Lennox helped a lot. And Cliff, in a way. I used a lot of what he taught me over the years we were married. Garrett nodded, a shadow of sadness flashing in his eyes at the mention of his father. He would have been proud of you, Mom. And of Eldon, too. I know, I said quietly. He was always proud of both of you. We stood there silently, each lost in our own thoughts about Cliff. Then Garrett suddenly suggested, "Would you like to dance, Mom? Like we used to?" I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "Do you remember how we used to dance in the kitchen to the radio when you were 10? "Of course I do," he smiled. "You always put Elvis on and made me lead. You said a real man should know how to dance." I laughed. "That's right. So, shall we dance?" He held out his hand to me. I took his palm. "I'd love to, son." We stepped onto the dance floor where several couples were already spinning around. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Eldon, dancing with Pearl, spot us, and smile broadly. He leaned over to his wife and whispered something in her ear. She turned around, saw Garrett and me, and smiled back. As I danced with my son to the melodious music, I felt the weight of the last few years begin to lift. Maybe my sharp temper will never change completely, but today I realized that there is always a way to find common ground if you try hard enough. After the dance, Eldon brought Pearl over to me. "Grandma, we wanted to tell you something." Pearl smiled shyly. "We've decided to change our honeymoon plans. Instead of flying to the Bahamas, we're going to take a road trip across the country, on a motorcycle." I couldn't hide my surprise. "On a Triumph? But it's our decision," Eldon said firmly. "Pearl has always wanted to see the real America, not just the tourist spots. And I've always dreamed of taking a long trip on a classic motorcycle. Now we have the opportunity to combine both of our desires. And we'd like to start our trip with a visit to you," Pearl added, "a week after the wedding. To show you how we're settling in with the motorcycle and just to visit you, Audrey." I was touched. "I'll be very happy to see you both. And thank you, Pearl, for understanding." She shook her head. "Thank you for showing me that true love is expressed in actions, not words. I've learned a lot from you today." As they walked away, I noticed that Veronica was watching us from across the room. Her face was pensive but not hostile. When our eyes met, she nodded slightly, not in a friendly way, but with a certain respect. I nodded back, knowing that complete reconciliation with my daughter-in-law would take more time, but the first step had been taken. The evening continued, and I enjoyed every moment. I danced with Lennox, whom Eldon had invited especially after learning about his role in restoring the motorcycle. I talked to Derek Hackett about classic cars and discovered that we had much more in common than I had thought. I even exchanged cookie recipes with Victoria. It turned out she was an excellent baker, although she tried to hide it from her socialite friends. When it was time for the newlyweds to leave, all the guests lined up at the restaurant exit, forming a living corridor. Eldon and Pearl, happy and radiant, walked through it to applause and congratulations. A Triumph decorated with ribbons and flowers was waiting for them at the exit. Someone had even attached a traditional "just married" sign to the rear fender. Eldon helped Pearl into the passenger seat, handed her a helmet, a modern one with good protection. I insisted on that. Then got behind the wheel and put on his own helmet. Before lowering his visor, he caught my eye in the crowd and gave me a thumbs up. I smiled and nodded, feeling my eyes fill with tears of happiness. The motorcycle started on the first try, and its roar filled the evening air. The guests waved and threw rose petals as Eldon and Pearl slowly pulled away, then picked up speed and rode down the road, disappearing into the distance. I stood watching them until they disappeared around the bend. Lennox stopped beside me. "Well, old hag, looks like your plan worked even better than you expected." I smiled. "That's right, old geezer. That's right." "So what now?" he asked. "What are you going to do after such a triumph?" I thought for a moment, looking at the setting sun. "You know, my garden needs some weeding. And then maybe I'll take up something new. Maybe I'll learn to play the guitar." Lennox laughed. "The guitar? At your age? Why not?" I winked at him. As the last 3 weeks have shown, nothing is impossible for me. 6 months later, my life had changed more than I could have imagined on Eldon's wedding day. My relationship with my family had improved significantly. Garrett called regularly, not just on holidays. Veronica was still a little distant, but without the previous hostility. Victoria Hackett invited me to her book club, and to my surprise, I accepted. Derek sometimes stopped by to talk about mechanics, and Lennox and I helped him restore an antique clock he had inherited from his grandfather. Eldon and Pearl kept their promise and went on their trip on the Triumph, regularly sending me photos from different parts of the country. They looked so happy in those pictures. Tanned, smiling, with their hair blowing in the wind. And recently they sent a special photo. Pearl standing next to a motorcycle with a barely noticeable round belly. On the back was written, "Grandma, you're going to be a great-grandmother soon. We hope you'll teach the baby everything you know. With love, Eldon and Pearl." I looked at that photo for a long time, feeling warmth spread through me. Life goes on, and despite all the conflicts and misunderstandings, love always finds a way to overcome obstacles. Sometimes all it takes is the right tool and a little ingenuity, as Cliff liked to say. And sometimes it takes an old motorcycle and a stubborn grandmother who isn't afraid to get her hands dirty.